At Lummi Island, taken in 1947. Reef net fishing is not common in the world. In fact, the only place reef net fishing is done is here in the Pacific Northwest in the San Juan Islands, and you're seeing reef net fishing at Lummi Island. Reef net fishing was done also up at Point Roberts and out at Lopez Island and a few of the other islands in the San Juan. What you're seeing is the reef net boats are in rows, and the rows kind of correspond with where the old traps prior to 1933, the fish traps were in Puget Sound, and they were outlawed. And in 1937, an old Indian way of fishing was reestablished, which was called reef netting, done by the natives here for years. And what you're looking at there is row one of the reef nets, which is close to Village Point. You see Orcas in the background, Orcas Island. You're looking southwest. That's row two, which is southeast of row one. This is the old barge they used to set the anchors and to help the fishermen get ready. These are boats that haven't been put out yet. You see Lover's Bluff there off to the left-hand side, a common place, and then the little niche to the left there is Holly's Fishing Resort. And the old landing barge, World War II recycled landing barge that was behind the scow there, that was the means for powering the scow out to help set the anchors. This is showing a haul in row one. The reef net gear you're seeing there at the present time is the one that Tom Philpott owns, or did own, for years. The pictures are being taken from the gear that Bob Klein owned for years, and where in late 1900s or early 2000s, when licenses were purchased, Terry Martins has his reef net gear right where these pictures are being taken from. You can see how uneven the gears were set back then, because the anchors were brought off the beach and put in every year by the scow, and so now, of course, the anchors are left down and divers go down and change into the lines and the ropes that need to be taken care of. You're seeing the beach in there just east of Village Point toward Lego Bay, and this is called Lego Bay. One of the early settlers on Lummi Island, last name was Lego, and his name was placed on this. If you notice how long it takes them to make a haul in this picture, you'll appreciate it was all hand done at that time. Today, of course, we have electric winches to do most of the work on these boats. And by the way, there are only 8 reef net sites left at Lummi Island. You noticed several rows of them. At the time this picture was taken, 1947, there were 75 reef net locations at Lummi Island in 9 different rows of reef nets. And in 2002, there were 8 reef net sites, and they were basically in 2 rows, and one site was in a 3rd row. If you'll notice in this picture, the men are out in the little skiff there cleaning the lines, because as the fishermen fish, they fish on an incoming tide here at the island, mostly incoming tide, flood tide, and kelp and seaweed is brought into the lines and the false reef that they build. You can see the buoys, and you can see the barge coming out with another anchor to be set. But the kelp and the seaweed gather on these lines that are in the water. These lines stay in the water all summer, and the men have to go clean it off. This is the buyer boat that used to come out, called the Dora. You'll see a picture of Floyd Todd a little bit later. He was the operator of that, and they set the anchors every year. Quite a operation, quite a task to bring 6-ton concrete anchors off the beach. Each of the anchors that are up in the front part of the leads on this, right where that skiff is, there's an anchor down below that buoy there, that big buoy that weighs about 6 tons that holds this operation out there during the tide. There are 2 of them. I mean 2 6-ton anchors, one on each side. They drop the anchor there and then they lift it up real carefully and then move it into place. They do this on a slack tide. If you notice, there's hardly any tidal action going through the buoys or lines, and they do it at a slack tide and a calm day. And now the Dora will come in and take over for that landing barge, because the Dora can maneuver easier, and they'll position the anchor into place, and you'll see them here pretty soon. They'll drop the anchor again right in the right spot, what the fisherman thinks is the right spot, and they'll go from there. That's Lummi Mountain in the background. We're facing southeast. The camera is facing the southeast, and you'll see there's a bay in here, and it's a natural place for fishermen. You see Mount Baker in the background, Lover's Bluff, and off to the left of Lover's Bluff there is Hawley's Fishing Resort. I don't know why the men wore red hats back then, but I tell you, most of these fishermen in this picture were loggers. In the fall and in the winter and the spring, they were loggers. In the summertime, they would go out and become fishermen. Logging was shut down because of fire season. You notice the old stands we have here. These are just poles that were taken out of the woods and made into ladders. And the men, the stands are about half the height of the ones we use today. The dog in the picture, name was Sandy. And the reef net boats you see out on the outside here were just hanging on the lines that were just put there. That scow just dropped an anchor and they set the lines back, and now the tide is running pretty good and the men are fishing on the other reef net sets. That's Al Abrahamson's plane that he would come in. He would be a diver that did go down and do some adjusting for the fishermen. He would be not the type of divers we have today. The divers we have today are kind of scuba divers, but back then it was a hard hat and a whole uniform and everything, and the pump the air down, and he would come and do some work. If you notice real carefully in the picture, you'll see the tide running through the lines. And this is an incoming tide. Again, Mount Baker in the background. We fish on an incoming tide, and yeah, the boats need bailing out once in a while. These were the older style boats. Now they have a totally different style. Back then, you notice they're winding the net up by hand and a winch. And you can see the tide running past. 4 men on a sight, 2 in each boat. 2 boats to make up, and the net stretched between, and then they pick up the net on the front, and pick up the net on the side, and then they would pull the net in carefully. The 2 men on the inside boat, which would be to the right here, they work the net back and work the net back and work the net back and try to work the fish toward the outside boat, which is to the left. And then the men in the outside boat will roll the fish into the boat and throw the net back in the water and set it back down for another catch. It's a lot of work, intensive work, particularly when the tide is running. Those fish, it's amazing how a few fish in the net can drag on that net and really be hard to pull in. That's why you notice an earlier picture, the black and white one, it took so long for the men to get the net in. Today, if we took a minute or 2 to make a haul, that would be a long time, because everything is power now, electric winches that do the work, except for rolling the fish in. Today, we roll these fish into a live well, and the fish stay alive all day long. These fish are being rolled into a dry boat, and you'll notice at the end of the film that they're selling, and they're taking the fish out of the dry boat. Today, we just take the fish out of a live well. They swim all day long. That's Sandy again. He was out there helping the fishermen out. And at the end of the day, the tide is slack again, and the Dora comes in beside, and the men then pitch the fish out. Today we don't touch a fish with a fish pew because that would injure the flesh. Back then, no big deal. These fish were all going into the can, so if a fish pick, it's just like a one-tine pitchfork is what it is. And there were so many, these are pink salmon, humpies or pink salmon that were being caught back then, and I don't know what they were getting a pound, probably 10, 15 cents a pound maybe, and so they were just being averaged and then just thrown in. That was Floyd Tuttle back there looking at the water line on the boat, and you see how beautiful it is. That's why fishermen kind of loved being fishermen, is we do get to see beautiful sunsets and sunrises and beautiful days. There are some stormy days though, but that's not in this video. Yeah, once you catch the fish, there's another job, as you can see, and that's unloading them. So at the end of the day, that always happens, and that's the old landing barge that you saw earlier, moving the scow, and it was used as a buyer boat. Quite a familiar sound from a landing barge. If you ever heard one, you know what they sound like, a diesel engine. Anyway, I'm sure anybody been in the service, particularly the Marines that made marine landings, that's what those were. That was a landing craft used for that type of thing. Converted now to civilian use. But the fishermen would unload and clean everything up and go home and eat and sleep and come back the next day. That fall they were fishing 6 days a week, and there was a tremendous pink salmon run, and they did quite well, 1945 and 1947. Pink salmon run only every 2 years, and so on the odd year. What you see in this picture here now, I mentioned that the reef netters were loggers most of the year and fishermen in the summertime. Well, this is Deepwater Bay on Lummi Mountain, and that's where the logs were kept. You see a tugboat in there, and you see deer going down to work every day. This is also, to the boaters, this is called a Naughty Bay. To us islanders, it was called Deepwater Bay. You see the rafts of logs in here, and you see the scow coming in, and in the foreground you see the stands of reef net boats. These reef net boats here were owned by Ellsworth Unique. He had 5 locations here at Lummi Island and 3 locations at, I believe 3 locations at Cherry Point before the refineries went in. And he kept his boats down here pulled up at Deepwater Bay. And so here comes the barge to get his boats and tow them on around to Ligo Bay, where they will be attached to the anchors. And you see, again, they were still logging and getting ready to fish at the same time. Bellingham Yacht Club, I believe, has a Naughty Bay or Deepwater Bay now, and at least it from the Dickinson family, and it's used for pleasure now. But I guess David did do a little logging recently and dumped the logs in here and boomed them just pretty much like this in the old days. You're seeing pictures here of 1950, I would imagine, 1950, 51, something like that. And the tugboat is ready to take the barges out. There's probably a deer in this picture again, and that's Ellsworth Unique's old power wagon, and my Uncle George Munt, who came back from the service after Second World War and came to the island, and he reef netted for a while. But the guys would take the boats and pull them down on the beach, and the skids there, some of them would put them on the beach and tip them over and cork the bottom. And Ellsworth Unique, his old power wagon that he had, and Clark and Barnes Island in the background, and Orcas beyond that. That is kind of the gray out of the sight there. But again, we're back in Ligo Bay, and you'll notice the back there, the little blobs on the head anchors, and that's where winches put on there by some of the guys in row 3, so they could adjust their leads for the incoming or inshore tide and offshore tide. But you see the old hip boots the guys wore. These videos, glad we're preserving these 8mm films, because these are just about had all they can take as far as longevity. But no, it was a lot of work getting the boats ready before they even got out of the water, making sure they didn't leak, and even the manufacturing of new boats. Several people on the island, Tuttles were involved in that. Marion Tuttle, I believe, helped to build some boats. I know my uncle, Warren Granger, he built a brand new set in 1951, 52, 53 in there, and this is boats anchored out at Holly's Resort, which was, we're standing right up on the beach by Holly's Resort. A very popular place. You're looking at Village Point, where the original site of the Indian reef net locations were. And this is a little cove that David Dickinson has there now, and now Randy Roten has his boats, and the Rotens and the Terry Martin have their boats stored here. This is where the boats were pulled down, and you see the skids underneath them there, and as I say, corked up. That's my dad walking toward us here, walking off to the right. My dad reef netted, so I ended up doing the same thing. You can see the tide going by here, and it's a kind of a sloppy day out there. You look real closely, that tide is moving pretty good. This is row one. And like I said earlier on the film, boy, you get a school of fish in there in the olden days, and your fingers were really sore. Some can remember the old cotton net, and you get a spring salmon in there, and if the spring salmon headed for the back of the net, you didn't want to be hanging on to it real tight, because when he hit the back of the net, you would know it. The tide's running so hard here, the nets are pulled up because of the rush tide. Back in those days, it was very common to drag an anchor. Somebody would get excited to see a school of fish come in, and they'd drop the net down and try to catch it when the tide was running too strong. And anybody that's been reef netting back in the 40s know exactly what happened. A lot of boats were dragged out. These are the old skiffs. These were the first square-nosed skiffs there were. These were war surplus, as everybody knew then. War surplus. They built. Those are the pontoons that they build across rivers and for bridges. The Corps of Army Engineers would build bridges, and they were surplus after the war. So the guys brought them out and used them as work skiffs. And we still make the same type today. The new ones out there, the aluminum ones, are made after the pattern of those old pontoons that were World War II surplus. Made great work boats. Now this is my dad getting ready to go up and take his turn watching for fish. The exciting part of reef netting is, most exciting part for most of us, is watching the fish come in from the stand. That's the exciting part. And there's certain stages of the tide that the fish come. Back in row one, fortunately or unfortunately, the fish come just about at the hardest part of the tide, and so it's a real struggle back then to catch them. Uncle's coming, and Uncle George Munt is coming off the stand, making way for Dad, and now we got the jugs out there, and a jug like that is dangerous. A jug like that caused a fire on Lummi Mountain one time, and also caused a fire on our reef net boat. The sun shining through a clear glass like that makes a prism, and it can start a fire. And we've had a fire, at least one fire on a reef net boat that way, and they figure the big fire in the early 40s on the mountain was caused by a clear jug like that. But here's a gear's making a haul on the inside of row one. This would be Johnny Brown's location that was sold, and this is the old way of hand cranking her up. Some of you guys watching this will have to appreciate the amount of work that was put into you're watching Ellsworth Unique walk to the back of the boat there, and his partner on there was Mac Granger, who later owned that gear. He bought that from Ellsworth. That's Art Granger, who just passed away this last winter. He's cranking up the bunt winch in the back there. Now they cranked it in, again, all by hand. Great days though, a lot of fun. We got to fish 6 days a week back then, and if you didn't catch them one day, you might catch them the next. Now we get 2 or 3 days, and if you don't catch them, you don't catch them. That's the way it is. Big changes, as all of us know who are in this industry. Changes in the price. Fish don't like to be corralled, and once they find they're corralled, boy, do they make a commotion. They try to, their instinct is pretty cool. They try to get out the same way they came in, and that's back to the front. And our job was to keep them from getting up there, because once they got up in the front, it was a real challenge, as all of us know who've reef netted, trying to work the fish back to the back and to the outside boat, which you're looking at there. The job of the people on the inside boat, as I mentioned earlier, was to pull most of the net, loose net, up, and then to work the fish to the back. And then you see there, they just let the winch back down and let her go, freewheel out, and hope that there's some more fish waiting to come in. When that front of the net comes up, the whole bottom of the reef comes up at the same time. For those people who don't know how this works, the whole reef comes up. And if there's a school of fish that comes down when it's up, sometimes they will just turn, go back out. And if you're lucky enough, when you get the net back down, they will turn around and come back. And by that time, the net is down, and they'll go into the net. So when that net is brought up, the bottom of the reef is brought up at the same time. This is the outside gear in row 2 making a haul, the one that Andy Yurchek owned for years. And now Andy's got the one, he fishes in the location back for inside of where these next location in from where these pictures are being taken. Another view of Holly's Resort and my uncle's reef net gear in row 2, the one that I grew up on, and the one that's right inside of Bob Jewell's inside gear, and that's Bob Jewell's gear is the one that my cousin Pete and I own now. And Riley Starks and Walt Ingram and Dave Hansen and Johan Janssen, they own that location you're looking at right now. Now they own the boats that go in that location. You don't own the location. The state did not assign a location to each individual fisherman. It's a gentleman's agreement where you set. The state established the rows, but they didn't establish who fished in the rows. So we have a license to fish in Lego Bay Reef Net Reserve, and so it's always been a gentleman's agreement as to where we put our boats. Year after year, they pretty much went in the same spot. In the old days when the scow was out moving anchors around, there are better locations than others, and so people kind of fudged a little bit. Anchors were brought in and tried to get into the better fishing location, and so once it was established that we kept the anchors down, it caused all of that. That's my dad cranking up the net, and again my uncle coming off the stand to do the job that he needs to do is pull up the sides of the net. Because when we make a haul, the front of the net comes up and the back of the net is cranked in, but both sides of the net have to be pulled in at the same time because the fish can go out under the boats. Mac Granger there pulling in the loose web. Yeah, for a young person like all of us young guys who grew up and fished out there and got excited about it, there were a number of island boys like myself who grew up and their dads fished and they didn't want anything to do with it. So it's just, again, you can see Mount Baker in the background. Always a beautiful view of Mount Baker when it's clear from out there. Just really, for us who take it for granted what we have here in the Pacific Northwest, it's, I guess myself, same. I had a unique place to grow up on Lummi Island. This fishing being unique too, but I didn't realize it and didn't appreciate it till years later. I look back and a pretty cool place to grow up as a young man. Be down the water, playing, out fishing. We could go hunting when we wanted to. Things have changed now. New people have moved to the island and new ideas and more people and, like I say, different ideas of how things should be done. No, but anyway, some of us still attempt to reef net today. Mentioned earlier, there are 8 locations left, and it doesn't look like there's a likelihood of there'll be any more, because our fishing time is so limited now that making it profitable has become a real challenge. Similar to farming and various other things, that the profit, and when there's no profit in it, why do you do it? So my cousin and I, and some of the others too, we kind of think of it as sport fishing in a different way, because if we got serious about trying to make money out there, you might have a challenge. But anyway, when the tide is over each day, the tide starts out slowly, and I don't know where these fish are at the beginning of the tide, and they're somewhere, because you hardly catch any fish at the beginning of the tide. The tide may run for 8 hours. The beginning of it, first 4 hours, we're just kind of staring at the water. Very rarely do we catch any fish. It's the last 4 hours of the tide that we catch the fish. Why that is, I guess the good Lord knows. We don't. Those fish are somewhere, but they don't get to where we fish here until what we call the top of the tide, which is the strongest part of the tide. And when the tide starts slowing down at the end, so it eventually stops and turns and ebbs, goes out and goes reverse through the reef net gear. In other words, instead of coming in the lead and going out the back of the boats, it comes in the back of the boats and goes out through the leads. We can't fish in that type of a tide. In most cases, there are a few gears that we have a kickback. We call it kickback, in that after the ebb tide starts, then hour and a half or so after it starts, then we get a kickback and we get to go out and fish on the ebb tide. But most of the gears did not have that privilege. But where those fish were, the whole first part of that tide is a puzzle. Because a lot of times right when the tide ended in our net, there was no place for the fish to go. In other words, as the tide slows down, the back of the net, which is being held out by the tide, so the fish have a place to go. The net slowly drops down and hangs straight up and down. And that is some of the times when the biggest schools of fish come and the most